Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is, ta-da, another fabulous presenter for UK Health Radio. Pete Hill is the host of the D Word show on our fabulous UK Health Radio, your global feel-good radio. And you can find and listen to the D Word show at ukhealthradio.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at Radio TDW and Facebook at Radio TDW. Welcome, Pete Hill.
Thanks, Catherine. Absolute pleasure to be here with you.
All right. Well, so glad. And we're going to be talking about a really important subject, which is dementia, which you talk about at length on your show. And hopefully in this show, because we are at the Natural Healing Show, we'll be talking about some of the natural things that people can do to take care of their brain. So, but we've got to start at the beginning. So, Pete Hill, what exactly is dementia?
Well, dementia is an umbrella term, really. It's an umbrella term for a related number of symptoms associated with ongoing cognitive decline. Probably people will have heard of Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia. Vascular dementia, and the other two most common forms are dementia with Lewy bodies and frontotemporal dementia. Probably the most common question I'm always asked is, what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, dementia is just the umbrella term that covers probably about 100 different types of dementia, a lot rarer than Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent. One of the most prevalent symptoms of Alzheimer's, and the thing probably dementia is thought of, is short-term memory loss. Now, this is associated with Alzheimer's, but every form of dementia comes with a different set of symptoms, and that's why it's so difficult to diagnose. And because, as you know, we are all different as people, we're all different as well. So we're all different. We're all getting a different range of symptoms. And hence the saying, I think, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia.
Now, Pete Hill, you seem to be firing on all cylinders today. So thank God, that's why we can have this enlightening conversation. How did you get interested in dementia?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, actually. I want to take you back probably about 40 years, which when I was a teenager, I volunteered on a hospital radio station at a large psychiatric hospital in North London, where I was living at the time. And as part of that, I once visited a ward which was very old, very Victorian, had high ceilings and peeling paint. And there were a group of people who, to me as a teenager, looked ancient. You know, they were all old people, and they were around a TV. And you have to be a certain age, I think, to remember this. But the horizontal hold on the TV had gone, so the picture kept flipping over every 30 seconds or so, and the people were just sitting there looking at it. And so I said to a nurse, well, you know, what's going on here? And the nurse turned around, and the terminology at the time was, well, these are all geriatrics. And as a teenager, I just took that face value and thought, oh, okay, a bit strange. I carried on with my radio career. I was there for 13 years in the end, and I got to know a lot of people that were, in the terms of the day, geriatrics, and I know now were people living with dementia. Fast forward nearly 40 years, and after a career in public health, I answered an advert on the web to be joint activities coordinator for West Essex, which is an area just north of London, close to where I live. And I ended up managing 6 activity groups for people living with dementia in the community. They were weekly groups. We had more or less 15 people in each group. And I suddenly had friends who were living with dementia, quite simply, and got very interested in the subject. That was a contract for 2 years. When that 2-year contract ended, I decided one day to put dementia and radio into Google because I wanted to learn a little bit more. And the only person I found was Laurie LeBay in Alzheimer's Speaks, who's with you in the US over in Minnesota. I found nothing in the UK. I thought it was a bit strange. And so it's a kind of story people say, where did the D word come from? And I say, well, actually, it probably started about 1981.
Fascinating story. Now, Pete Hill, as you know, as we can remember, I remember when before I was 30, I thought everybody over 30 was old. And now that I'm 62, about to be 63 next month, I'm like, those are the 30-year-olds are young. And so often when we hear about different illnesses, we think, oh, that only happens to other people. From your experience and your expertise, what is the lifetime risk that of someone getting dementia? In other words, do we have a 1 out of 3 chance, or what's the chance of the average person in our society today getting dementia?
Yeah, I think, so go back to what you were saying, first of all, Catherine, aging is a strange thing, isn't it? We're saying in the UK that you're beginning to age when the policemen look younger, which is one of the sayings we have here. If you put it into straight statistics, 1 in 14 people over 65 develop dementia. As you go further up the age range, over 80, it's 1 in 6. But the statistics don't always tell the story. Dementia is seen as a condition of age, but I think the problem a lot of people make is they also see it as a condition of aging, which is definitely not the case. And there are significant number of people. I mean, just obviously I'm based in UK centric with my stats, round about 45,000, 50,000 people in the UK have what is termed young onset dementia. So they've developed dementia before the age of 65. And you can, with rare forms of dementia, and go further down the age range. There is a very rare form of genetic dementia called familial Alzheimer's. And this is passed on with a gene in the body. And basically you have a 50-50 chance of that being passed on, sadly, to your children. And that can affect people in their 30s.
Well, and you took the question right out of my mouth, because I asked what age group of people are most likely to get dementia.
Yeah, again, it is associated with age. We've got to say that. I mean, here in the UK, we've got approximately 850,000 people living with dementia in the UK. The worldwide figure is approximately 55 million. It's very difficult to pinpoint that worldwide figure, because in a number of countries and a number of underdeveloped countries, the diagnosis rate is so small that there are a lot more people living with dementia, certainly, than get a formal diagnosis. And just put it in perspective, in the world format, okay, if dementia was a country in the world, its economy would be the 18th biggest country in the world.
Wow. Just wow. So you're doing extremely important work over at the D Word Show, helping people understand this, the 55 million of us who are suffering from dementia. Now, let's talk about risk factors. So, for example, if I wanted to avoid heart disease, I might decrease or stop alcohol. I might start exercising. I might start dealing with my stress. What are the risk factors that increase the likelihood of a person contracting dementia?
But the really interesting thing is that, you began to mention some of them there, because our level of understanding of these risk factors is not all that great, but they have massive commonality with risk factors associated with, for example, heart disease, for example, diabetes, for example, a lot of other conditions. So we are talking about high blood pressure, we're talking about a lack of physical activity, talking about alcohol, we're talking about smoking, we're talking about lack of sleep, we're talking about diet, obesity, and those things have massive commonalities with lots of other conditions. But one of the interesting ones for us here in the UK, and I know for you in the US, I'm a big sports fan, and there has been a lot of work done on the effects of concussions and repeated concussions on sports stars and the likelihood of developing dementia. And here in the UK with our soccer players, we have found a great correlation between those. There's a very eminent guy called Dr. Willie Stewart, who works at the University of Glasgow, who's done a lot of work and a lot of really good work on this. And I know it's been a big problem in the NFL. And I think it's going to be a problem in the NHL as well. I have a friend, Dawn Astle, who runs the Jack Fastow Foundation here in the UK. And I know she's got a lot of NHL players that now contact her because of that. So that's another risk factor. Some of the other work that's been done is there are environmental risk factors as well. Pesticides and particularly air quality. There is an emerging link. There's been work done in regards of poor air quality and the possibility there that will lead in later life to developing a form of dementia.
Fascinating work. And, I've done my work in natural healing now for about 28 years. And my first 10 years in natural healing was learning all about how to heal the brain. And there's some very interesting techniques that I do where on people who've had head injuries. And it's not funny, but it is funny. Like the soccer players who bop the head with their ball, and they're taught to do this as a technique in the sport. Every time they do that, they're causing a small head injury. And many people have head injuries and don't even realize it. Simple things like falling off your bicycle when you were a child, or falling as a baby, because as a very young infant, your brain is soft and your skull is not fully formed. So there are many people who have head injuries who don't even realize it. Okay, now here we are at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. And let's talk about natural healing remedies or approaches. From your experience talking to different experts, what natural healing remedies or approaches work best in treating or coping with dementia?
Well, I think, you mentioned diet. I think diet's a really big one in terms of not only coping or, dealing with dementia, but also as a precursor to hopefully not developing dementia. Diet is a massive influence. Exercise as well, and building body strength. As we get older, we need to maintain body strength. And social interaction is an absolute massive one in terms of dementia, to keep your brain active. I had a relative who used to say, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And that really resonates in terms of dementia. When I used to manage the groups, we used to do a lot of cognitive stimulation therapy, which is a technique that's Dr. Amy Spector, who works at University College London, was the pioneer of cognitive stimulation therapy. And a lot of the studies on CST, as it's called, have shown it is better than the drugs that do exist in terms of dementia. I think you have to kind of look on the other side of the coin as well and realize that we've had one new dementia drug in the last 20 years. So drug treatment in dementia is still very much in its infancy. And it's also all about treating symptoms. It's not about treating root cause. So there's loads of place for natural healing. And you yourself will know, obviously, things like dementia. And in terms of dementia, rather, you've got things like yoga, mindfulness, CBT, all be helpful in de-stressing us. So, you know, there is a lot out there. A lot of people see dementia, I don't know, we'll go on to why it's the D word, but a lot of people see dementia as, well, this is the beginning of the end. But actually, there are so much that you can do, and you don't have to rely on popping a pill to do it.
All right. Now, with that great information, let's pause for a break from one of our sponsors. So let's go back to natural healing remedies for dementia. And I want to talk about yoga, which you mentioned. And recently I was doing some research for a relative of mine who suffered some seizures in their 60s. And I was trying to convince them to do yoga. And there's scientific medical research that older women, meaning women over the age of 60 who practice yoga who practice or have practiced yoga for at least 8 years, have more gray matter in their brains. So I'm about to be 63. I've taught yoga for 27 years now. So that was very, very encouraging. And one of the things that we know is that a person exercising and riding a stationary bicycle has more brain activity than someone watching an educational video. As you interview the experts on dementia, what sort of kinds of exercise do you feel, Pete Hill, are most beneficial for people with dementia?
I think there's a couple of areas there. Obviously, we look at, some people say perhaps 120 minutes of exercise a week of a fairly reasonable standard. But I think one of the major things is just, a lot of people have this thing about exercise, don't they? Oh, I can't exercise or whatever. But hey, just go out there for a walk, because walking is terrific exercise, and also get out in the environment. I'm chair of a UK charity here called Stepping Out with Carers, which basically looks at providing walks for people, caring for people with all kinds of conditions, but a lot of people caring with dementia as well. And it's amazing to see what good it does to get people out, to get the heart rate going a little bit and walking, but also to be out there in the environment. And while I don't have any empirical evidence, I just know by looking at the people at the beginning and the end, when they've actually gone out to a walk, that, you know, we're doing a good thing. And that is a really important thing. So I think when it comes to exercise, it can be simple. And a lot of this stuff can be simple as well. And I think people are sometimes put off by thinking that they have to do a lot more than they do.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in making it easy. And there's a technique called Kaizen, which is the art of making changes in small steps. So for example, maybe you start by when you're watching TV, you stand up during the commercial break and march in place for 60 seconds. That's a Kaizen step. Or every day you take another step. Or one of my favorites is, let's say you're listening to this broadcast and you have to take a break. Well, find a spot from 5 minutes from your desk. And if you know that if you walk to that spot and back, you walk 5 minutes. Well, let's say you do that little walk 6 times. So I do believe, having worked with clients with dementia, if you tell them, oh, you've got to, do this huge exercise program, it can be very overwhelming because mental overwhelm is part of the challenge for dementia. So breaking everything down into little steps that are achievable is very helpful. Now let's go back to diet, because you talk to all these experts about diet. Because we can say, oh, eat well. Well, eating well means different things to different people. What, in your professional opinion, Pete Hill, is the best diet for preventing dementia?
Well, it's kind of here in the UK, we have this concept of the Mediterranean diet, which I probably never quite got my head around, to be honest. But I think, we're looking at less red meat, we're looking at fish, we're looking at less sugars, we're looking at less salt, we're looking at low fat. And we're looking at, I think also, going back to what you were saying about exercise, I think diet is something that scares people off a little bit on occasions as well, where people, think they're going to go into this really strict regime where they can't occasionally, eat a gummy bear or something that they really like. But it's in terms of keeping things in moderation and making the most of your diet and those types of foods, is what I'm kind of hearing from people that I speak to, and just little changes you can make, whole grain instead of white bread. And again, I really resonate with what you said earlier about making small changes. Well, don't throw your whole diet out the window. Let's make some small changes here. And those small changes then suddenly start to make effect.
Yes. And, on this theme, and wouldn't you agree that people with dementia, it's my professional experience from 28 years in full-time in natural healing, that people with dementia are in mental overwhelm. And so if you ask them to make too big changes or too many changes, they literally can't do it. Isn't that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when your cognitive function starts to decline, decision making is one of those things that sadly goes with it. And the last thing you want is for people to overwhelm and bombard you with options. And this is something that, again, there's a technique to actually talking to people living with dementia, depending on what stage they're at in their dementia. And part of that technique also is just to make sure you don't mentally bombard someone with questions, because it's kind of human nature. When you think someone is not well, then the first thing you bombard them with is a whole bunch of questions about how they're feeling. And that's probably the last time, that's the last point that I actually want to answer all of those. We'll think about that in talking to people with dementia as well.
Right. Now, what do you think, Pete Hill, the biggest challenges facing people living with dementia in the UK are at this point?
So it's a tough one. One of the biggest challenges for me is post-diagnostic support, because over the 2 years or so that I've been doing the D word, I've heard some horror stories about lack of post-diagnostic support. I've heard some very good stories and some great practice. I've been subject to some, not particularly good practice in terms of post-diagnostic support. So the biggest thing I think that we face is consistency. And I've had people on my show who've gone to prominent neurologists, and I won't mention the person, but this is a true story. Went to prominent neurologists. The lady's husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The neurologist said, well, I'm afraid the diagnosis is Alzheimer's. Good luck. And that was it. That's where it stopped. Personally, I've had someone say to me, in respect of my mother-in-law, who was living with Alzheimer's before she passed away, well, you work for the Alzheimer's Society, you must know more about this than I do. And that's just not good enough. We need some form of post-diagnostic support, and we need it for everyone at a consistent standard. So I think that's, and from what I hear, I talk to a lot of people where you are in the States, I talk to people in Canada, I talk to people in Australia, and they're all coming up with the same story, that, you know, they want some form of consistency, because when you receive a diagnosis, it's a devastating time. And what you want is, you want a signpost and you want to know where to go. I have a friend who was diagnosed with dementia at the same time as, sadly, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. The two differences were, when her mother was diagnosed with cancer, it was, we're going to do this, 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 this. Here's something to read. When she was diagnosed with dementia, it was, well, you've been diagnosed with dementia. Here's a book. So that's an issue.
You bring up a really important point, Pete Hill, because there's 55 million people worldwide suffering from dementia, according to what you understand. So if someone has been, let's say you go to the neurologist and they diagnose you with dementia, what are the next steps, if you will, for someone once you've been, after an initial diagnosis of dementia?
I think that is the big question. What are the next steps? The next steps generally for people is they need information, don't they? You've been given a diagnosis, you require information. But going back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, you don't want to be bombarded with so much information that you can't take it all in at that time. So, you know, giving people a book with it all in is probably not the way to go about things. Interestingly, here, I got involved here with cognitive stimulation therapy with the groups I used to manage. And again, inconsistently here on the NHS, there are cognitive stimulation therapy groups that run after diagnosis for 14 weeks. And people can go to groups and do this. I didn't find out in 2 years of working with the Alzheimer's Society how you got on one of those groups and how you missed out. It was the luck of the draw whether you actually got onto one of those groups. And at the end of it, I got a carer who said to me something that I'll always remember. She said, well, this is all very good, Pete. We've done 14 weeks, but now we're falling off the end of the cliff because we haven't got anywhere else to go. So, you know, in terms of going back to your question, when you come out, in the UK, you have a memory clinic. When you come out of the memory clinic, you should be given a clear pathway forward as to where you can go and when those steps will cut in. And there are lots of brilliant little charities that are trying to piece all this together. But again, there isn't the one consistent approach.
Really fascinating. Now, I want to go back to natural healing remedies. And one of the things that, from my experience, that I know is a risk factor for dementia is heavy metal toxicity. And you can run lab tests on heavy metals and see, you know, is my body overloaded with heavy metals? It's a huge issue. A lot of it has to do with your cookware. And I remember years ago, my brother and I, my brother's a medical doctor, I'm a medical intuitive healer, and we were both talking to my mother about her pots because she'd been cooking on the same pots, you know, since she was first married. And we were both like, your aluminum cookware is a major risk factor for your brain. What is your understanding about heavy metal toxicity and how that can set people up for dementia?
Yeah, I do. You know, you're right in saying there have been studies, as you talk about aluminium pots and pans, in terms of things like exposure to lead, etc. I mean, it's probably takes me back a long way to the beginning of my public health career, where I can remember doing an environmental lead survey and finding out some horrendous things. We found paint on children's playgrounds, which was military specification and was basically, you know, 80% lead content. So, you know, thankfully, I think we have improved things since then. But I think this is another one of those areas that needs more research into it. And the major problem, I'll go back to something I said right at the beginning, is because there are so many forms of dementia with so many different symptoms, it's very difficult in an environmental science point of view to actually tie it 100% together. And I think that's a difficulty. And, environmental factors is something I'm really interested in because I did it for part of my career before getting involved in all this stuff that I'm doing now. And I don't think there's enough research for me going on in terms of all those environmental factors and actually piecing together something that could be really important.
And from my experience as a medical intuitive healer, if I do have a client who's high in heavy metal toxicity, you have to work on, opening up the detoxification pathways. But a really simple thing to do is using a far infrared sauna. Now, of course, not everyone has access to a far infrared sauna, but my experience is that is the best way to get rid of heavy metals. And now another word from our sponsors. Now, Pete Hill, your work at the D Word Show is so important for the 55 million people worldwide suffering from dementia. How important do you think is social interaction for people living with dementia, and how are people with dementia coping during the coronavirus lockdowns? That's got to be super, super hard.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point because social interaction is incredibly important. It's been shown even more by COVID-19 and the pandemic. Interestingly, there was a bit of research that was done in the UK by the Alzheimer's Society, and the research came up with the fact that 79% of care homes reported that the lack of social contact during the pandemic caused deterioration in health and well-being of their residents with dementia. So I think that kind of tells its own story. We're talking about 8 in 10 people here with dementia, because people rely on that social interaction. When I was running my groups as well, it's not only social interaction, having visitors come in, family members come in and friends come in, but what I found, and some of the prominent quotes I found, was from our group members. They loved being there together with people who are living with dementia, because one turned around to me and said, well, I don't really worry about the fact, if I say something silly, so what? We're all living in the same boat here. We all understand each other. And so I think there's a couple of aspects. There is the general social interaction that's very important, but also the social interaction with people who are going through the same thing. And to be fair, I mean, we all find that if we've all got a certain condition, then it's great to sit and talk to someone who's going through the same thing. So why is it different with people with dementia? I think one of the things we face now is, hopefully as we come out of COVID, how we're actually going to reverse that 79% statistic that I was talking about, because sadly for a lot of those people, I think that lack of social interaction is going to be an irreversible damage.
Yeah, that's really heartbreaking. Now, if someone gets diagnosed with, say, cancer, there's no social stigma to that. It's just like, wow, I'm really sorry you have cancer. But when someone gets diagnosed with dementia, there's a certain stigma associated with that. So Pete Hill, how do we remove the stigma associated with dementia?
Well, I think we do take some of the learning facts from cancer. I mean, my show's called The D Word. 30 years ago, if we talked about cancer, it would have been called The C Word, because I can remember the reaction of some of my relatives then to someone having cancer. It was very hushed. They didn't want to talk about it. No one wanted to talk about it at all. Now we have mainstream adverts on the TV for, Cancer Research UK or whatever. People do want to talk. And I think, I've coined this thing on Twitter, hashtag Let's Talk Dementia, which basically is, hey, let's talk about this. And when we talk about things, they start to become slightly less frightening. And also the other big thing is we need to start young in talking about this. I've got a couple of friends who've written books for children and for teenage children about the subject of dementia, to get people involved and kids involved at that level. And I think that's a really important thing. I think one of the other things in terms of stigma is language as well. This blew me away, this statistic, which, I don't know if people know, in Australia, there are 145 indigenous languages in use. And for 99% of them, there is no word for dementia. So, we've got to talk about it, but there are languages out there that don't even know what to call it.
Fascinating. Now, as you know, there are people suffering from dementia, and then there are the people who care for dementia sufferers. Let's talk about the care group. Are dementia carers a forgotten group, in your professional opinion?
Yeah, answer very clearly is yes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Let's go back to the pandemic a bit. I mean, that's shown it absolutely massively. I mean, the stats here in the UK is there's something like 700,000 families caring for someone living with dementia. And just in terms of the UK, that saves the UK government in terms of care costs around about 13 billion UK pounds a year, which is massive when you think about it. And we all had a little sense, didn't we, when we were in lockdown? It was, couldn't go out. We were stuck at home, didn't know what to do. Well, just think of those people that are living with someone living with dementia. So a dementia carer who relies on being able to go out, to have a break, to go out for a walk. All those things are removed. And so, we don't treat here in the UK, I don't think, carers anywhere near the way we should do. And from what I'm hearing, I'm not an expert worldwide, but, I think the situation is fairly similar throughout the world. They're doing a massively important job. They're saving a massive amount of money, but, they're not respected any way that they should be.
Now, one of the things we know from looking at statistics on what are the most stressful professions, dentist would be right up there. Caregivers, that profession of being a caregiver to anyone is one of the most stressful professions of all. And so right up there with high risk professions where people are risking their lives every day. What advice do you have for a family member who's caring for a loved one with dementia?
Well, I think first of all, I love the use of the word profession, because caring is a profession, but it's not seen as such, I don't feel. I was at the Alzheimer's Society probably about 2 weeks when I had a carer burst into tears and cry on my shoulder. And I was very new to the job. I was new to dementia at the time. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? This is a really difficult situation. So I thought, well, let's just be human here. Sat down, poured a cup, as the English do, poured a cup of tea. And we talked. And we talked for probably 30, 40 minutes, something like that. And probably about 18 months after that, I got to know the lady quite well. And she came up to me once, about 18 months after, and she said, I'll never forget you sitting me down and just the ability to offload and talk about it. That was so important to me at the time. And that kind of gave me the lesson of you've got to make time for people. You've got to listen to people. And for carers, that is so important. And going back to what we do with carers going out for walks, etc., it's just that ability to go out to meet people and talk about things. And that can really, really be effective.
Yeah, just this week, I did a medical intuitive reading for a lady and her mother in her 80s, and the mother had dementia. And the daughter, who was an adult, and her husband were the full-time caregivers for the mother. And you could see the incredible toll that it had taken on the daughter for caring for her mother, who she loved very, very much. And the mother, had really deteriorated. So what sort of support, in your professional opinion, in addition to having others to listen to, what sort of support do dementia caregivers need to get on a regular basis?
I think they need information, they need knowledge of, where the condition is going. Dementia reaches a number of stages, and sadly, as a caregiver, at some point you may reach that stage, and I've been there, where you have to decide whether leaving someone in their own home or caring for them in your home is actually the right thing to do. And at that point, that's when you need a lot of support, professional support, if you can find it. There are lots and lots of really great charities. There's a brilliant charity in the UK called Dementia Carers Count, who have just launched an information hub which contains not only support in terms of emotional support, but all the physical stuff that you've got to go through as well. We may be talking about selling properties, we may be talking about getting solicitors involved, we may be talking about all kinds of stuff. And carers at that point want all that weight lifted off their shoulders, as we do. And then it's the emotional support of actually having to go through with your loved one, making that decision about the fact that they may well be better off now in a care facility. But interestingly, I'll tell you a story from my perspective. Okay, we sat down with my mother-in-law. What happened was she went into respite care in a care facility just 5 minutes away from where I live here for a couple of weeks. And it became fairly clear that she would have real difficulty in her own home. It was a larger house and she couldn't cope anymore. We sat her down on the bed and we said to her, look, did you like it here? And she said, yeah, it was very nice. I like it. He said, well, look, unfortunately for you to stay here, we're going to have to sell the house for you to be here and stay here. And she gave it a little pause. She looked and she said, yeah, that makes sense. And that was it. So, and before that conversation, you can imagine what we were going through, how are we going to do this? Oh dear, how terrible is it going to be? Well, sometimes it isn't. And sometimes you need that little bit of coaching before, just to go through that. And for someone to tell you that type of story, to say, well, okay, see what happens.
Yes, I know I have a client who has been caring for her husband for many, many years, who has dementia, and his condition has deteriorated, and he's basically bedridden about 18 hours a day, and it's taken a tremendous toll on her mental and physical health. So at some points, I think a family member has to decide the equation, am I able to continue caring, and what are my other options? And it's very, very difficult. So, which brings me to my next question, Pete Hill, which is about dementia-friendly communities. In your professional opinion, do dementia-friendly communities work?
Well, people that have listened to the D word over the time we've been broadcasting will know I have a theory about dementia-friendly communities where I want to drop the word dementia because I feel that friendly communities are the way for us to go forward, because everything we propose in a dementia-friendly community will be good for everybody, whether they're living with dementia or not. We need a more tolerant and helpful community where everybody looks out for everyone else. Now, in terms of dementia-friendly communities, there are certain physical things you can do which don't apply to everybody. Certain forms of dementia give you big problems in terms of visual perception. I said to a shopkeeper once, that black mat that you've got at the front of your shop there. Well, if you've got someone living with dementia, they're likely to think you've actually got a hole in your floor. And they looked at me and said, is that right? Oh, we didn't realize that. Boom, off goes the mat. There goes the problem. So there are certain physical things we can do in terms of particularly this thing with visual acuity. You can make signs a lot easier to see, but the whole ethos of a dementia-friendly community is a friendly community, someone where we will help each other. If someone is there, someone is in the supermarket having a problem finding something or whatever, no, just go up and help them. And that is fairly simple. And I know you've got it in the US, we've got it here in the UK. We have certain supermarkets that will do that. Interestingly, we have certain supermarkets that have gone for hours to help people with autism, which is great and it's brilliant. But they haven't actually taken that next step to say, well, why don't we just do it for people with dementia as well?
So Pete Hill, host of the D Word on UK Health Radio, a fellow radio presenter, any final thoughts for our audience about natural healing approaches for dementia?
Well, I think there is a lot that can be done in terms of preventative, and a lot, we talked about earlier on, didn't we, about heart health. Well, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So all those messages with regard to heart health and preventative measures. And when someone is diagnosed with dementia, I really want to get the message across, hey, this is not the end here. There are lots of things that you can do because we are so different, because the condition is so different. There is no prognosis of X number of years or whatever. So there is so much that can be done. Things like yoga that you were talking about, all the things that you talk about on your show. I mean, just because someone is living with dementia does not mean that the natural healing show is closed from them. I would suggest that it's a really good listen because, it's something, we could all do. And I think the one thing that I would like, and going back to dementia-friendly communities, is we include people living with dementia right in the community. They're like you, they're like me, they are part of our community. And as such, everything we can help our community, we can help people living with dementia.
Very powerful message. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Pete Hill, wonderful host of the D Word on UK Health Radio, which you can listen to at ukhealthradio.com. And remember, your brain is the most important organ in your body. And as you learn how to take better care of your brain, you can take steps to reduce your chances of getting dementia. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.